podcast.
Oh shit. Yes. What's up, people? Welcome to Creative Theory Podcast. I just messed up the music intro, but I think it's okay because it's still going. The beats are good. How's it going? Welcome to Creative Theory Podcast, a show that brings you conversations with visual artists about how they got to where they got, what their day-to-day is like, what their struggles are, what their thoughts are on the art world, and a lot more. My name is Ilya. I'm the host, and today I'm super excited for this one. Today we got a very special artist, painter from Vancouver BC, graphic designer, mural artist, graffiti writer. You could keep stacking them. He's also a basketball pro player, but turned art pro later. He's an avid camper. I think that's a thing too. Also, he's got a show coming up on May 11th at Kimoto Gallery, and we're gonna get into that for sure. Scott Sueme.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining. How's it going, man?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So just going through that list and the amount of work you've done in these different avenues, I was actually trying to show my friend recently your Instagram. I was talking about the podcast, and I was scrolling down because I wanted to see some of your previous work. One, I didn't realize how much graffiti you used to do. Two, it felt like there was a time where you didn't mix your fine art and graffiti art. Would you is that true? Was it on purpose or no?
Yeah, I think I definitely it came a point where I started to see them as two separate practices. Mm-hmm. And I think I used to do a lot of graffiti. It's kind of my introduction to artwork, actually. Mm-hmm. Was through just the culture of it and just painting and all that kind of stuff. But I used to see them as, I think, I used to see graffiti as art when I was solely doing that. But then it came to a point where taking it out of context, like showing graffiti art in a gallery, just didn't seem to make much sense. Like it almost seemed that graffiti belonged kind of in context of, where it was born, like either on trains or in the street and outside in the public sphere. Yeah. So taking it into galleries, it just didn't seem to resonate in the same way. It didn't sort of feel like I don't want to say authentic, but just felt different. So
just because on its own, graffiti is such a pure form, but the fact of posting graffiti artwork along the stuff that you would make at a studio, was it a conscious choice to, like I said, from my I had an impression that for a while it was only graffiti, and then I think the switch was almost at least on social media, it was pretty quick. It was all of a sudden it was mostly your studio work, the letters that you're doing.
I think a lot of times I was just sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, whether it was to continue doing graffiti or transition and just do fine art. And a lot of it was just to kind of I liked how graffiti was an inclusive culture, but it was also kind of limiting in that sense too, only being able to reach a certain group of people, aside from audience saying, oh, I like the colors of what you're doing, or I like the style. It's definitely a sport for the subculture, and I think my desire to kind of reach a larger audience with my work, or have meaning that was beyond just letter forms and things like that, it pushed me to want to create fine art that was a little bit more progressive, or had more opportunity to it.
I like that he called it a sport. Is it? Is it actually?
Yeah, well, no. but yeah, I do kind of think about it in terms of it's very action-based graffiti. It's
I think it was either you or James mentioning to me how just the race to be the most visible, or the highest, the higher up, or kind of the notoriety of it. Like you were saying, it's almost like, that's why I like the analogy of sports, is that it feels like, okay, I got to get there before someone else does. Or
totally, yeah. It's definitely very, very action based, which is, it's interesting. I think graffiti informs my work now in so many different ways that are beyond just the aesthetics of what my paintings look like. But but yeah, a lot of that militant kind of attitude, or just how holding a spray can and going up to a wall is almost like a full body kind of motion, and commitment, and the time frames that you're often, whether you're painting it illegally or legally, it's often you're doing things rather quickly or covering a large surface area in a short period of time, and yeah, at times it does feel kind of like a sport.
That's cool. Now that I think about it, I guess it really makes sense why you do work in larger format. I mean, now that you've mentioned it, the fact like that you're using your body, I wonder if that's like a conscious or subconscious like leftovers of street culture, like just working big because you get your body going. As we're chatting, your Instagram is Scott Sueme at Scott Sueme on Instagram, right? Yeah,
that's SCOTTSUEME.
Very nice. Yeah. So scroll down the way if you want to see some graffiti. It's been a while.
Yeah, I haven't done as much house cleaning as I should have. I mean, I think if you go down earlier to my feed, there's some really grainy and filtered.
Oh, that's how everyone started out on Instagram. Before we knew how to take like proper photos, and filters are not very cool actually. And the little border that you put her on your arm. Oh yeah, don't do that.
Lots of those. They're still down there. So if you feel like wasting your time, scroll right on down.
But I think it's kind of exciting. I don't know. I did go back and I didn't delete a lot, but I remember deleting a couple of pictures. But I think it's kind of cool to be able to see it's like history, or what's the other word you can use? Yeah, you're seeing a progression, and it's like growing up of a person.
Totally, it's like a timeline.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean that's Let's go. But I really like that. I mean, I guess like when you're a little kid, like things you did are embarrassing. I think it's probably the same thing in art. Like when you look at your Instagram.
Sure.
Like, yeah, if you scroll down too low.
I think it's. I've seen a couple of videos of kids who've like taken pictures of themselves every single day.
Wow.
Of their life, like going up, and it's always such a. It's crazy when you see it in like a condensed in like a 6-minute video of your life. It's going to be weird when you get really old and all that information is still there.
Totally, but maybe kind of fun. Like, do you think you would be interested in seeing your like grandfather's timeline? I mean, wouldn't that be pretty fascinating?
Yeah, I think it would be cool to kind of see, the timeline and the progression, and I think within that there's sort of like little life lessons along the way, but
also probably a lot of like goofy personalities where you look at adults and like they're adults, but if you like imagine, meaning like I don't know, there's probably some stupid pictures I got, and then like if your kids or grandkids see this like stupid picture of you, like, oh yeah, he was a kid at some point.
Yeah,
he's not just an adult all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, sidetrack, but I want to have another quick question about this. So, but did people in the, like, as you're transitioning from the graffiti crowd, did people look, what was everyone else's opinion on you switching to fine art? Like, because I know it's like you mentioned, it's quite I would say graffiti crowd, a little cliquey, or it's a group of people, and I mean from the outside it seems like very tight, but maybe hard to get into and get like respect, because that seems to be what it's all about.
I think so. I think keep in mind, I think in graffiti there's no two graffiti writers are alike, in the sense that people have different aspirations and different goals for what they're trying to get out of art practice or graffiti. It's the same in art as well. It's people are in it for other reasons, and I think in graffiti there, like you mentioned, there are people that are purists and believe that there's a certain way to do things in graffiti, and it's definitely an art form that has a lot of rules, if you want to consider it through a cultural standpoint. It can get pretty detail oriented in that sense, and I think for me, like when I first started graffiti, I was definitely someone that was more interested in like graffiti that had sort of like a high production value, if you will. Like I think some of the first things that I painted as a in high school were productions with painted backgrounds and that kind of thing. Like I remember getting the Source magazine in high school, and they used to have this like 3-page graffiti spread in the back of the magazine, and they would have a lot of it was from New York, and there was a crew that did like they would do like themed productions, like walls that were like, there was this one that was like a Monopoly theme. It had like the background was all like the Monopoly board game, and then there's these like colorful, really elaborate graffiti pieces like kind of pasted on top of this like themed background. And I just remember looking at that and just loving the production value of it and the detail and the the craftsmanship of that. But on the other side, there's definitely graffiti writers that are more interested in the rush and the illegal aspect of graffiti, where it's either tags or just something thrown up quickly. And it's it's definitely those two examples are not the same person, even though they both do graffiti. So I did get some flack from people that were more on the pure side, but I think for myself, it was just about understanding what I wanted out of graffiti, and it's the same as what I want out of art now. It's I want to progress stylistically or progress my own practice, and I think at the end of the day, a lot of people in graffiti kind of saw that in me. Whether I was doing graffiti or abstracts now, it's still the same progression. So,
and you definitely evolved, and it's cool that what you mentioned as your intent is clearly shown through your work and like through your catalog, and I definitely want to touch on that. But so would you say, were you always studious towards art? Like you're saying, even like trying to do a high production in graffiti, like your approach to it is very like a student of art. Like, was that always there?
Yeah, I think so. Like I was definitely always trying to figure out graffiti, like from whether it was different techniques, and I'm definitely very process driven in my work, so I definitely like enjoy that aspect of art making, and just dissecting how to do things and materials and that kind of thing. I find that stuff very interesting, but I think with graffiti and art, it's kind of the same story.
Or you can approach it very similar, or not, I guess, just like anything else. Before we move on from this graffiti thing, I just thought one thing you mentioned that was curious is that the reason why you transitioned or went more like into studio work and like canvas work and then gallery stuff later is because you wanted to express your art differently. You mentioned how, I don't think you used the word sophistication, did you? Or did I make it up? But like the outcome, you said you wanted the different outcome from your art, which was a transition. Did you feel like there's limitations, like those limitations within the graffiti world? I mean, we're seeing a lot of murals these days that are pushing it. And I know it's not the same as like the graffiti crowd. It's like its own little thing now, or a big thing. Sure.
I kind of get what you're saying. Yeah. It's I almost don't want to use the word limitations, because there's still people that are very progressive in graffiti and still reinventing, within that realm.
Yeah, but like personally, like what was,
Personally, I think I was, I think going to Emily Carr kind of, changed how going to art school, it kind of changed how I saw things, because my hands were kind of forced to do projects that weren't based around letters.
Yeah.
Which was
that good for you?
Yeah, it was. Well, at the time I kind of hated it, because I was like so obsessed with typography and like doing graffiti letters that it was kind of a challenge for me. But it definitely forced my hand to kind of think about art in terms of what happens when you're no longer allowed to rely on letters to kind of build your foundation of how you create things. And I think that opened my mind up a little bit to kind of seeing the potential beyond just letters. And there was definitely a time where I was doing pretty interesting graffiti work where I'd combine the idea of like abstraction or like pattern making with letter forms. And I think that was probably when I was painting the most like progressive graffiti in my eyes, I think. Just like doing trying to combine certain things, and then I just think you want to remove the letter context, and that kind of opens up what the meaning and purpose of your art is about. It's no longer meant to be read or have a message to say. It's becomes more nuanced, right? It's
and now you're evoking a feeling, I guess, right? So
yeah,
it's not attached to that. Yeah, and then there's something to be said for it being then easier digestible by like the world rather than a language, you know what I mean? Because in the end you're writing still in English letters, right?
Yeah.
And then putting your art into visuals. Actually, is that a have you seen graffiti like in different language? I haven't thought of it even
In different languages?
Yeah,
Like it's
especially go ahead, sir.
yeah, it's definitely hard to I've seen it
Or is the scene like specific, like, because I know everyone looked to New York, right, for like,
Yeah.
and so probably everyone just ended up writing in English where they're from like India or Korea or something.
it's kind of it's a language. I think I consider graffiti a language in itself, almost like the way and so much of that is rooted in New York and sort of like the early 80s how I find it really interesting in graffiti how there was a time where nowadays there's so much to look at and build inspiration from if you were to start writing graffiti today.
Yeah.
But in the 80s they didn't have that. They were just doing, and when you look back at certain visual moves that people were making or certain styles that people gravitated to back then, it's a lot more pure, right? So I think graffiti is so much rooted in American culture and rooted in it's hard to look at it in another context. But maybe if you are from like Thailand or something and you paint in Thai letters, like maybe that's building a whole new language or repertoire for.
I hope it's happening because it would just be so fascinating to see it. I mean, the whole idea of like, different people interpreting in different ways, and then if the language looks different, all of a sudden your word structure, the way the letters and play with each other,
Totally.
It makes it like it gives you like a new palette. If all of a sudden you stop writing English and you started writing a different language.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds fun. Sounds fun. Do you still pay attention to the scene, even though seems like mostly out of it?
I do. Yeah, I definitely do. There's a lot of artists similar to me who've started in graffiti and progressed forward, and a lot of those artists, I still definitely admire the work they're doing. Like right now, there's a big exhibit in LA called Beyond the Streets, and it's all about like the history of graffiti and street art and what these artists are doing now in a museum context, like in contemporary. And a lot of the installation work that they're doing is it's bar none. It's like amazing work. So
I'm sure I'm not the first to say it, but I think it's funny that the counterculture is culture now, like
totally.
in big ways, and it's pretty interesting to see who embraces it and who doesn't, because just like you're saying, there's a different type of artists, people, and then their approach to the craft and to the it's so different, but it's really cool. I like it. I don't know, the more types of art the better.
Totally, yeah. I would say I don't pay attention to the politics as much anymore, but I definitely do pay attention to artists. And
there's no need. It's too messy. Too many opinions for no reason.
Yeah.
Just want to see cool art.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got a show coming up, as I mentioned, May 11th. It's the opening reception. It's called Homework, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just looking through. Yeah, it's Homework. But the way I think, or I wanted to do, let me know, is I think it'd be pretty fun to quickly go through your journey, and it's kind of nicely outlined within your bodies of work, like in previous shows.
Okay, yeah.
I think it would be pretty cool to kind of chat maybe about if you remember, I know some of them were like through the thought process or just like ideas of those previous couple of shows, and then to listen to your approach now.
Okay, yeah.
Because to me, I think it would be pretty cool to, it's just like a little history of you and your thoughts on art.
Sure, man, let's do it.
To me, I mean, I know for people who are listening, we're probably going to be talking about just like aesthetics and visuals. We don't have to get too into the nitty gritty, but if you want to check out his work and his bodies of work, let me see. I got your website right here. It's Sueme Now, so SUEMENOW.com. So if you want to follow along with us, I think it'd be pretty fun. One thing I want to say before we get going, I feel like out of the artists I know, and actually I didn't mention, is that we're studio mates, and I've been sharing the studio with you, which has been pretty sweet. But out of the artists I know, you're probably the most evolved. No, how do I put it into words? Like, I've seen you evolve the most out of everyone I know, and in a really interesting manner, where it's like every step seems to make sense from a bigger picture. And whether it was like me reading about your bio, what you're talking about it now, it's cool to see how, at least from my perspective, each show was like a step. But I feel like out of everyone I know, your aesthetics have changed the most, which I think is, to me, is really fascinating, because you brought really high quality, but then you did a show, and then next step is like you didn't stick with the same, or like you let it evolve.
Right.
Which I have a feeling, whether it's a choice or not, some people get stuck in something where seems I don't know. This is me, but you consciously feels like have been really pushing yourself to change or maybe to find yourself.
Definitely, I think. I even early on, even when I was doing a lot more graffiti work, my style would change quite a bit, and I think a lot of that has to do with, one part of it is really just boredom, like getting bored of doing the same thing. Like it's just not who I am, and I think I look at it like school in some sense, where you're going to high school and you do science and math and social studies and woodworking, drafting, or you try earlier on you try a lot of different skills or schools of thought, and then eventually you kind of gravitate to the one that you find most rewarding or find most challenging. And I think I looked at art in that sense that earlier on I am still now quite young, so it's like just trying to get all that exploration out early, and then hopefully the more you try, the more you know about yourself, and the more you know what direction you should go in, I guess.
Meaning like that, I guess, because you're saying I imagine very wide exploration. I doubt you're going to stop exploring, but you mean like in a really kind of big what do you call it, like a shotgun kind of exploration where you really try many things.
Wide spectrum,
Sorry, just touched upon something, the exploration. Anyways, if I remember it, I'll get back to it. But it's really hard to do though. What you're saying is that if you're treating it like school, because I think often artists would ask, or I hear this question a lot, is about how people like a lot of different things, they like a lot of different styles, and then to kind of hone yourself either in one direction or even to finish work, which seems like you've successfully, even though you're interested in different styles, it seemed like you finished enough work and then you kind of moved on to the next one. Is that true?
Yeah.
But how do you know that, or how do you know to do that?
Well, I think I'm kind of like someone that learns by doing as well. Like I like to jump in and kind of figure things out. So like if you go back to some of my earlier paintings, a lot of them are just me kind of having an idea in my head and then trying to figure it out through the process. Like I think it's a lot harder to like sit down and conceptualize and think about the exact style or the exact thing that you, or expression that you want to do, and then that becomes what you do for the rest of your life. Like that sounds to me like really, that's a lot of pressure. And
maybe you shouldn't even do that unless your mind really works that way, right?
Yeah, unless your mind works that way, or unless if you're a planner, like that kind of thing. But I think through art and it was just kind of like jump in with whatever initial idea or concept you want to work with, whether that's like scale or colors or anything, and then just kind of so like each body of work earlier on, it was just kind of like me figuring myself out and figuring out how I like to compose things, or how I like to work with color, or like what's working and what's not, and then when that's done, it's like, okay, what can I learn from looking at all this work that I just did, and how can I change it up or build upon it? So.
But what's awesome is that you already had an idea of like an idea to be consistent, where for me it's actually on this podcast Peter Reek was the one who mentioned, like, because we talked about this kind of same idea of being fascinated by multiple ideas or types of art, and he's like, oh, you just finished work, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's so simple. Just it's like you get to do what you want, but just finish a body of work. So I'm trying to do that. It seems like you've been doing that for a while. So was Letters was that a body of work, or is
so Letters was an exhibit that I did at Elliott Lewis Gallery. I don't know what year that was. That must have been like,
doesn't say. You're hiding it from us.
2011.
Oh, there you go. Oh,
so
no, you're not hiding it. I should have seen it.
Well, right now this lamp is like obscuring my vision, but
I
can see it
here.
It was. So the the guys that I was painting graffiti with, we were also like doing art shows and stuff at the time, and yeah, it was my first kind of it was, you know, in contrast, it was called letters, although most of the pieces are more geometric.
Fun
like
shapes,
they're just shape based. I was painting a lot of this like geo style, I guess you'd call it. It's all just triangles and different colors and kind of like built up. So what I would do is I'd just like start with one form and then kind of like build and react around that, and then the result would be like different composition each time and a different kind of color scheme. So
and it's really fun on that one. It looks like you still use that, you would make the background kind of gritty, like there's the, and then you paint it on top.
I think when you paint graffiti, you want that sort of like the idea of adapting to space, or like adapting to those textures. Like really, I was really drawn to them at the time, like just kind of creating on top of. It was also a good way to, like, you know, I'm pretty sure a lot of artists can relate to this, is that you know, when you have a fresh white canvas and you just stare at it and you're like, yeah, it's a intimidating thing. It's like it's so pristine, right? So part of that is just like taking the preciousness away from it, like you know, I still do this now to a certain degree, but like essentially mess it up,
but not as much though. Do you?
Not as much, no, not as much.
And this is interesting. I think this is why it's so fun to do, because you've documented yourself so well. It's like 7 years. I mean, like from 2011 to now, your approach to a canvas. I mean, once again, being in a studio and seeing how you start. I think a lot of canvases are to start up pristine white, and you're such a I don't know if you're perfectionist, but at least like you're so regimented to how you approach your pieces. Where I think it's very interesting. Once again, just even like looking at all the work, and it's the texture. I've seen you play with texture kind of again recently, but you were building up those shapes that are not just flat, but like the transitions.
Like building up. Lately I've just been really into like heavy body painting, like just showing brushstrokes, and just I think earlier on I just really hated brushstrokes, like I didn't want to show them at all, and now I'm like, oh, I love them.
Me too.
I want more. So yeah, I think speaking about texture, it's it's something that you want to, I don't know, it's a way to like build up layers, or just I think initially it's important to take that preciousness away, and just and then you're like, oh, I just like messed this painting up. Well, it can't get worse than it is now. So
Exactly. But it's so freeing when you can let yourself like mess up and be fine with it.
Totally.
Like even I remember in animation, like, I felt like it really clicked for me when I realized that it's okay if I break it, and kind of being okay with the fact, like, because then the preciousness doesn't help really, and I guess that probably goes for every kind of art, every area of art. Just not to be too precious with it.
For me, it's especially the stuff I'm painting now, it's a really big deal. Like what I'll do is, like, you know, I work with shape and color, and basically I would compose 2 or 3 shapes or something, and I'll be like, oh man, I really like this. Don't ruin it, Scott. And then I'll just like kind of dance around those initial forms, and I'll be like, it's not getting better, it's actually getting worse. At that point you just got to be like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go over this entirely and start from the beginning, and it's often in that small moment of deciding to rebuild the work and letting go of what was there before, I'm able to actually like create freely. So
you gotta trust the process somehow. Do you think I remember names of your paintings from 2011?
We could play that game.
We don't have to, but I wonder. I guess I'll just show. I have some problems with naming paintings where the name comes up like earlier on. For some, I feel like I don't really want to name it at all, but then you kind of have to. And I think those are the ones that I wouldn't remember. Like, I don't know about you. It's tough. Sometimes I do feel like titles kind of mess with paintings in that sense. Like, do I really want to put context? People need a story.
I guess so.
Maybe that's what it is. Were you always drawn to abstract work? Because I read on a website right now, like, you describe yourself as abstract painter.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely think I'm. I've always been. I've never been much of a drawer. Like, I don't really draw very much. I'm like which is why I think it's always funny when people like find out I'm an artist. They're like, oh, I can't draw a stick figure, and I'm like, well, neither can I. I'm like horrible at drawing. But yeah, I've always resonated with abstract work, and I think graffiti, in a sense, is abstract in a lot of ways, because I remember just like I used to take photos of like cross sections of my graffiti pieces, and I used to love looking at that because it just was color and form. Like those two are probably the two elements that I find it most prevalent in my work now, and kind of at my core focus. So I used to do that a lot, and then just kind of would be like, okay, well, what if I create a painting from this like crop? What would that look like? And yeah, I like the ambiguity of abstraction. I like the idea of not I like the work being about kind of the nuance, like the materials, or like the color resonating with people as a feeling, or like something that's not tangible. Like I'd like that.
What makes a good abstract work? Because that's a tough one. I feel like I don't know if you see it, but many people, you see often artists jump into abstract work assuming that it's going to be easy or something, without understanding them on a just practice and skill and the work that it takes, I think, to get to that point. I think there's a misconception, I would say, like in the society about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think what would make a good abstract work is kind of, you first have to like look at the historical context of the work, like how it's some of the earlier on abstractions from like Picasso, or you want to look at how an abstract artist is like building upon those ideas of something that was created kind of before them, or in context with something in art history. It kind of grounds the work in a way, and then you can kind of interpret it that way. But you can have a striking abstract piece that was just created on a whim as well, like that. You don't necessarily need to consider art history when you're looking at abstract work. But I do find if you're doing contemporary abstract, having that historical reference embedded in your work in some way is it definitely helps.
It's kind of like knowing where it came from, like knowing what kind of footsteps you're following.
Exactly, yeah. Or like the sort of ghosts, or however you want to put it, that are woven into those ideas.
I guess either to be inspired, or try to do something completely different, just to know, I guess, the things that have been done. Maybe, would you say? Because you're saying like draw from that, but I want, I'm there's so many ways you could do it. Are there any artists that come to mind that you're still or recently inspired by?
Yeah, so there's a couple artists that I've been admiring recently. A lot of them are working with more textiles, and a lot of that is kind of founded from like 20th century abstraction, where it was kind of like an exploration of like order, like Mondrian, for example, or like Ellsworth Kelly. Like these artists were exploring abstract forms, but it was much about the order, and it was much about the materials. It's not necessarily the depictions, right? It's kind of a rejection to guys like Pollock, who were doing this really expressive abstract work, and it was kind of like, no, we want to see order, and we want to see work that's about kind of the nuance of color and materiality.
And I like that they're going in 3D as well, right? I mean, they're doing it in various spaces, not just like flat media.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that was a really cool. I think that brought just a lot more elements into it.
Totally. Yeah. And so there's a lot of contemporary artists now. One in particular I think she's from Vancouver. Her name's Colleen Heslin, and she does like cut canvas. So she takes canvas, and then she sews them together, and in a way that they often aren't painted at all, but they have like a feeling of an abstract painting, because the edges are kind of not totally straight. They feel kind of gestural
Pulled,
and pulled, and I think just in a general sense, the idea of like the surface of the material becoming the artwork is like a really interesting direction for abstract painting, because it's no longer about paint on a surface. It's about they are together. They are one, and I think that's like that's in a way furthering minimalism and furthering abstraction. It's like, you know, how can you simplify this even more? And you know, someone like Colleen's successfully done that. So
I remember seeing her work. This is just the conversation's getting very deep. I've seen her work at Vancouver Art Gallery, right?
Yeah,
that was really impressive.
I think she actually has a show this Friday at Equinox as well.
Oh, there you go.
I'm probably going to go and check that out. So.
Do you know, is it going to be a lot more tapestry work as well, or like fabric?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like they're gonna be paintings. People can't see me doing air quotes right now, but they are paintings, but they are woven and stitched.
She needs to come up with a new name. She just branded. It's like, I don't know. Cut fabric, sewn together, stretched on a canvas.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. No, I like it. I just feel like we got so deep into the abstract explanation. It's so interesting. Yeah. Just hearing.
There's just so much you can do.
Yeah.
With just like that's part of my like continued inspiration on like color and form. It's that you know, just those two things like really simplified my life. Like, you know, going from graffiti and doing fine art and trying to do so many like graphic design and murals and trying to do so many things. It's like you know, now I'm just, let's just focus on those two things and see how much you can do, and it's really endless. So I find that really cool.
It's cool that you put some sort of like restriction or guide, not guidelines, restrictions on yourself. Yeah, otherwise you could end up pursuing way too many things at once and kind of get stuck. How simple do you think you'll go though? Is there, do you worry about? I mean, like, are we ever gonna get just like an orange canvas from you?
Oh man. Time will tell.
Time will tell. Okay. We'll see. So going back to your shows, this a really interesting progression, because so then you're positive places, and I think that body of work, I think that's where around the time maybe I got into the studio with you guys, 2012, maybe not. I don't remember, but I remember seeing those pieces around there. I really, really love that work, and that seems like to be the midpoint of graffiti to studio work, just because the elements almost feel like equally divided. The aesthetic, the techniques are equally divided.
Sure, yeah. And I think that series is interesting to me because I also brought in like landscape into the work. So I was working just with a lot of like, I would use like you know, markers and like kind of graffiti tools, if you will, and then kind of create different abstract compositions. A lot of it was just like form based, but I would at times, it started with just like doing these like geometric paintings, and then like, you know, you're exploring compositions to a certain degree, and then eventually it's like, oh, this, you know, this kind of looks like this is turning into a landscape. And then, you know, this series was kind of like about me pushing that envelope of like,
so you're finding those landscapes within it, and it's like I guess adding a bit of representational to the abstract work.
Sure, and then using like spray paint or you know, certain sometimes like letter forms would appear in the landscape as like objects almost like. It was kind of interesting. And then towards the end of that series, I was actually doing like, you know, taking photos that I had taken from travel, and then like, you know, replicating those gestures, or like kind of like a landscape artist would work. But I would only select like certain things. So the painting that we're looking at right now, it's got like, you know, shadows. There's like a pool, and this was based on a photo that I had taken in Barcelona when I was traveling, and then I just kind of picked certain elements that looked interesting. So there is kind of like an architectural like context to the work, and then just exploding with like color and graffiti isms and other things in there. Yeah,
that's awesome. So I guess that's where this is where that practice started for you, because I know later on in your works, even just by reading the name, like you're describing like a place, or I don't know if often, but haven't spoken with you before. It's like you're taking these places and putting them on canvas. So like that practice started, I guess, around that point. Then I guess we're around positive places.
Totally, yeah.
Which I think is then a good transition into arena, where you're now actually showing physical spaces, and that's so like just speaking about that. Now all of a sudden we got representation through. How do you describe it? It's like it's not through abstract. No, it's like graphic shapes, and then you got the representational environments.
Yeah. I don't. It's funny. I always thought it was interesting, like you being in my studio as well. Like I'm in a studio with all representational painters, pretty much, and I kind of thought that was. It's interesting in the context of the work I'm doing now. It's almost like right now I'm sort of the only one that's doing mainly abstract work, but I think this series, how did it start? It started with that one painting of the pool. I think I was really I think part of it was like I was inspired by you guys.
But all bad influence on you.
Yeah. And guys like yourself and Drew, who were doing highly realistic, detail oriented representational work, and also just a lot of the commercial work I was doing was like required me to do some level of representation for work. Like it was almost like I wanted to see if I could do it. Like I wanted to see if I'd be able to pull it off, and if by the end of it I knew that if I needed to draw upon this in the future, I would have some knowledge of how to navigate that. So
that's interesting. So he's got some commercial work motivations as well.
Yeah, totally.
Nice.
So this is like for the people that can't see what we're seeing.
Check it out, Arena body of work. Yeah.
It was a series I did where I was looking at different photos of either from like my own travels, like some of these are photos that I had taken, and the theme of the show was like recreation and landscape, and I was kind of interested in the idea of capturing these spaces that were designed for sports, because sports have like this unique set of rules to them, where there's like lines on the whether it's lines on a basketball court or a tennis court or what have you. Those lines kind of inform how a game is played. And then I was like, okay, well, if you bring that into painting, maybe it becomes how these lines inform a landscape or inform a space,
or like a visual aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of use those lines as kind of ways to like divide the composition of a painting, or but
that's really cool. And I think that's going back to what you're saying earlier about how you're like, or the words I used, like a studious approach to art. So the show is like, well, let me teach myself this thing now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that some of the smaller pieces were already having those flavors of what is to come. Like there's this one piece here, drop in. I mean, if you take away the basketball, it's like the composition, the shape breakdown is already feeling like you can have a bit of a sense of. I mean, look, I guess we're looking back, but what is to come, and then so you got your. Yeah. And I feel like I guess like so your next body of work, Retreat, which is, let's see when it was. That was 2016, and that's where you. What you do now, the work that you create now, it seems like that was the
start of it.
There you go. Yeah,
for sure. So this is actually interesting, because what I initially set out to do with Retreat was usually like my partner Kaylin and I would go on a trip in January, and that's when we would like she would have time off and it would be relatively quiet around the studio, where I could like take a trip. So it's been a number of years where we've gone away in January to go traveling and kind of refresh ourselves. And so we went on a trip to oh man, it was so amazing. We went to we started in Las Vegas and did New Year's in Vegas, and then we rented a car and we drove from Vegas through Joshua Tree and ended up in Palm Springs, and then we drove back to Vegas and then flew home, and that was kind of our annual trip. So I came back with all these photos of mid-century modern homes, and kind of like from Palm Springs and from the desert, and things like that. And I was initially I was just cataloging all these photos, like I was gonna use them, kind of like how I did Arena.
Yeah.
Like I was gonna use those photos to like make paintings from. And then I got back and I started I had pre-designed in Photoshop like 10 different paintings, and that was going to be the show.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started painting the first one and was like mixing colors, and then I was like I hate this.
Wait, were you planning to do them representational as well, like
sort of, but my intention was to be like looser with it, because Arena was like super tight and detailed, and like I went in and like painted like every shade of brick in the background.
Oh,
and,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
It was like really, it was almost like too graphic. I feel like, so I wanted to like be more painterly with the landscape. So I was like ignoring certain things, and I think I don't know if it was like the scale that I was working with, because I was still painting medium-sized work, and medium to small, I should say, and it just didn't translate. The first one didn't, like, it was a miss. It was like, and I just remember like getting into the car with Kaylin, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing with this show, and the deadline was looming, right? It was like the show was in April, and I was like, I had just gone back from this trip, and I was like, this painting sucks. And so I just had to kind of scale back and kind of like, you know, I just started to realize a lot of the work that I was interested in, and a lot of the work that I was looking at the time was abstract. And, you know, looking back at my lineage, you know, a lot of my earlier works were abstract.
Exactly,
and I was like, maybe I just need to like, start painting again, and just not try and get out of my own way, essentially, and just like, let's see what happens. So from there, I just went back to the studio, reorganized some things, and was like, I think I'm gonna go back to painting abstract more, but I kind of have a feeling of how I want the work to resonate. So Retreat now, it has like a vibe of leisure and a vibe of like tropical places or that kind of thing, but there's no depictions, like there's no like, I mean, there's actually some like forms that kind of represent foliage or like the idea of tropical places, but
you're giving an impression, you're giving a suggestion of it rather than like an actual interpretation of the so that's very interesting. That's a really tough lesson to learn, and I think I can relate to you feeling like, oh yeah, none of this is working. But it's like, do you know, you're always given a choice, I think, which is the challenging part. Is like, do you continue or do you reject and start over? Well, because you're your own boss, and it's such a tough one. Well, the fact that did having a deadline there help?
This show was so tight. It did help. Like, you know, certain things were just resolved because I didn't have enough time, or like I remember just being super late with everything, getting to the gallery, and just like meeting with one of my mentors, like Penny Lane, like super late when all the work was already done, and it was like, well, this is the work. And just being able to make a couple minor changes, but the show was like, it ended up being a hit. Like, I think we sold like all the paintings.
It looks beautiful, but this is a very interesting like case study of that super tight deadline and not knowing what to do produce the best work.
Totally. Yeah.
What can you learn from there? It's repeat that again.
Well, it's also like, you want it to feel easy, like you want it to be fluid. Like, I think whether that takes 6 months or whether it takes 2 months, I think that fluidity is what you're trying to capture. And I think that's kind of where I was, you know, at a point in the beginning of the work where I was trying to force things.
Or you're trying to climb this mountain which maybe you didn't want to
go towards. Exactly. Anyways, and then once you kind of relinquish your own control, that's when you're able to like think rhythmically and kind of like with your own intuition and create from that. I think is a much better place to create from.
One thing I struggle with, and what you brought up, is like trying to decide, because you're saying, you were looking at a lot of his abstract work, which, you know, naturally it showed your interest. So why are you forcing yourself to go the other way? In my case, there's a tough line where, for example, like the kind of art I look at, and maybe because I've spent a lot more time on it, where it would come more, like you're saying, maybe more fluid, but it feels like you could also use the word easier. Not that it's going to be like the best work, like the struggle there is less. And then in my case, figuring out, should I pursue that because it feels natural, or maybe not natural, like it will come a little easier, or should I try to pursue something else that is harder, and trying to understand yourself and see, am I not pursuing this other thing because I feel like I'm slacking off and I don't want to do something harder, or should I pursue it because maybe I actually don't like it? And just knowing that.
Yeah.
And I guess just in the end, you need to know yourself better to make that decision.
Totally. I think, I can relate to that in a lot of ways. Like, I think there's a certain... like you feel like you're copping out if you go the easy way.
And it's a weird word, right? Because it doesn't mean like actually easy. It'll, you know what I mean? Like painting in the end, to get a beautiful aesthetic, it'll take time, but maybe those initial steps will be easier, something like that, right?
Yeah. Because I think I can definitely relate to it in the sense that, like, when I was doing abstracts earlier on, I wanted them to look dense and challenging, like they took a long time to make, and that's what makes good art, kind of thing. And
that's a young perspective.
It's not necessarily true all the time. It's like things, even some of the paintings I do now, like some of them resolve in over 3 days, and others take months. Like there's 2 panels that are in my studio that I just keep putting
the infamous
layers.
Panels.
They just get moved around, and stuff happens on them, but they never resolve. And they will eventually, but when you look at those when they're done, like that's like 6 months worth of painting underneath there. But it's like, it's I think time is kind of irrelevant in some ways, I guess.
It is, and learning if a painting made in a spontaneous manner can often be a stronger one. I think all of these things go back to knowing yourself and like teaching yourself when to stop and to know what is good, which is the hardest thing, and you can never catch it. And I think it's kind of evolving always.
Totally. And I think you brought it up earlier, is like the idea of setting restrictions on yourself can kind of help you know if you're on the right track or not. Like know if you're if you're playing by your own rules, essentially, and if they can help at least tell you what's something that you don't do all the time that you probably shouldn't, or like, I don't know, it can kind of like gauge, direct you in a certain way, so
it's like having some sort of like design pillars for yourself, or like it's almost like you have to design. You have to give yourself a name. Like you're giving yourself these guidelines, and then helps you not stray. Because this is actually really good advice, because I should probably do that, because I'm very easily like excited by all the other types of art, or like even just visuals and like subject matter, that I think it's very easy to stray from that.
Totally.
What you said about trying to do earlier work and make it dense, I feel like it's a trap, but maybe it's actually a good kind of trap for a younger artist to fall into, because it seems typically the super realistic or the super rendered and tiny brushstrokes. It feels like often it seems like something that people get really attracted to as artists, especially earlier on, because the idea like of what good art is like you said, like a super dense thing that actually looks like it took days and days. While there's paintings that are simple which take days and days too, and it's actually deceiving, and it's something you learn along the way. Just that simplicity can often be harder than like the harder density
path.
But sure. What do you think of that? Because I think it's a good trap to fall into, because it just teaches you more of a technical maybe approach, especially when you're talking about representational work. A lot of people would, if you're trying to paint a person, try to get as realistic as possible, and then it seems to be like a natural growth of like, oh, maybe that's not what art is.
I think it teaches you patience, like above anything else. It's how to sit with an idea and kind of flesh it out, and whether that takes a really long time, but I think patience is kind of the long lesson. Like the more stuff you do like that, the more you have a threshold to sit with things longer, and I think that's like wine, it produces better work, so
it helps down the like along the way. But I do find it interesting how like the mature work often no, that's not true. I don't want to make rules, but often like more simplified or like concise, because it's very hard to say a statement very clear without any mess around it. It's like a beautiful sentence or something, like, or a poem. Like, it doesn't need more words. But just to do that, to get there, it's really hard to pull that off in the beginning.
I think what you're describing is this sort of like idea of a sweet spot, almost like the right amount of something, because you can have work that's really dense, but it has like, it's all like either lines, or it's all like one pattern, or it's concise in the sense that it's maybe doing one thing that takes a really long time, but it's no more, no less, that kind of idea. Whereas you can fall into the trap of like just trying to fill up space. For example, it's like, oh, if I just build detail around this thing over and over and over again, it's going to look like there's a lot of lines, and it's going to look. But maybe it's not about the amount of lines; it's the way you do them, kind of thing. Yeah, it'll
be impressive for a different reason. Yeah, and then I guess we can't judge that as well, because clearly people, like, there's the artists who find like love in the density of it.
Sure, yeah.
I think as long as density is used not as a tool to, like, you put a lot of density just because that will look cool, but rather like as a tool because you put density because like a story element or feeling, right?
Totally.
There's reasons. Because that's probably another trap, but it's like little tricks that can make something visually look cool without a proper intent within it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All the tricks. Okay, well, I mean, this was I like a little journey throughout the catalog. I mean,
that was fun.
And now we're on homework, and this is the latest body of work. How long were you working on that?
I think. I usually do a show every year, and this time I took last year off because I thought I would be moving, and that would be too much work to kind of think about doing a new series and move. So
you're very nice to yourself.
Yeah, I tried to be, but obviously it I didn't end up being able to move in until the time frame where I would have been working. It was like clear sailing anyway, so it was moot anyway. But I think I had a lot more time mentally to prepare for this series, and it was the first time that I felt confident about building upon what I had done the year before. So I knew it was going to be less of a figuring out thing, and it was going to be more just like, how do I refine and how do I look at things in more detail and just make them better. I was sort of like confident that I had found my stride, and just so to answer your question, I think I had a little bit more time to think about it, and then I think I started working on it in November.
Okay.
Nice. So
it really does. What you described, the work feels like that. It's like you took your last show and you just built up upon that, and I don't know if it's like you've matured it. I don't know if that's the right word, but you kept you kept honing that aesthetic and those visuals. It feels it's really cool.
Yeah, I think how I can differentiate them, I think the last show, Retreat, was sort of about the idea of leisure, like I was saying, like the idea of creating this kind of vibe of leisure, or a vibe of like relaxation and travel and things of that nature, where this new work is kind of more abstracted. It's not particularly one kind of feeling. They're all just kind of abstracts. And I think that's kind of an evolution in the sense of, when you look at abstract painting, it's like, it's about form and color alone. Like, I didn't want it to be about any other theme than that. So that kind of opened things up to, where I wasn't restricted to certain shapes or restricted to a certain vibe. I was just kind of like creating out of form and color, and
it almost sounds like it's too much freedom that you gave yourself all of a sudden, because on one hand it sounds like it's not, but then if you opened it up yourself to anything, as long as it's color and form, I mean,
it was kind of, I definitely set a lot of like we're saying, like design pillars along the way, and a lot of that was just in how I was going about creating, and the colors were kind of important, and that started with about 14 colors and kind of evolved the color palette throughout the painting process. So
awesome.
I started with like a limited set, and started with certain limitations, and kind of just like evolved the series from there.
And it looked like you've refined the mark making. I think it's almost like you've limited yourself to a couple of an analogy to a couple of brushes. What I mean is that I think if you compare so this one to the previous show, is like the kind of mark making that you would do, or the kind of even shape making. It feels like here in the recent work and homework, it's more concise. Like that, just like that, the kind of application that you did. You know what I mean? Like, was it conscious or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you should
touch up on your process with paper and the cutouts. 'Cause I think that's kind of cool. I think it relates to that topic.
Sure. Yeah. Of course. I think with brush strokes specifically, like I used to use like a lot of rollers and things like that, and I would with my last show I would kind of strive for a sort of flatness with some of the forms, and now I've kind of I want the artwork to feel painted. Like I don't want it to feel graphic. I want it to seeing my paintings up close, you'll notice like the quality of the edge is kind of like one that comes from a brush.
It's handmade.
It's handmade. It's a specific brush, and then other times I'll just like build layer upon layer and just kind of be more assertive with how I create brush strokes, and a lot of that is just is an evolution of like how I want the surface to appear, and a lot of that is just revealing a truth of the materiality of paint, that it's not like I'm not manipulating it to become flat. Which is a nice transition away from digital. You know what I mean? Like from the feeling of digital. That's right.
Because even though you're designing it that way, I think it's a nice step that you take towards being like a handmade, handcrafted product, right?
Yeah, it's like I think painting. If we look at painting in a general sense, it has a charm to it. It's something that's like ingrained in humans, I think, forever, and it's like it's so easy to there's probably like a million ways to do my paintings in a more fast and with digital applications or however you want to do things in 2018. I just think there's a million ways that you could do flat color and get a pretty similar result, but I think the charm of painting is a lot to do with the material of it, the way it looks, and then also the inefficiency of it in a way is kind of charming, right? Because it's really slow and kind of messy and not ideal for in compared to like how we've evolved printers and things like that, right? So it's I think a lot of that is just my desire for that is just going back to this is your lane and stay in it.
So so do you think the handmade art is here to stay? It's not going anywhere, even though the digital is plowing along?
Yeah, I mean, I think in relation to people's work, there's the idea of digital work or digital applications heightened the work. So it's not to say that it's wrong. It just has to go with hand in hand with what you're doing. And I think my aesthetic and how I work with cut paper and very analog and tangible materials, I think it's a natural fit for me to like stay and kind of showcase paint as it is, not try and hide it.
I really like that as well. I mean, in my work, kind of doing it through impressionism, but the same idea of like showing the brush strokes. But it is it's like you said, it is totally slow, but there is a beauty to it. You can kind of get lost in the process, but part of it is also people understanding the work that it takes. There's not a lot of corners you can cut to get to that kind of result.
Yeah, and I think for you, working in animation or working digitally full time, it's kind of like a way to slow down, and kind of go back to a more thoughtful application,
And I always say that it's just nice to make things that you can hold, like it's a physical thing that is just right here.
Yeah.
And there's only one copy, and
it's a one of one. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that's you're capturing the essence of what it means to be a painter.
Totally. I really like what you wrote about the art show. I think kind of like a statement for it. One of the lines really stood out is the simplicity of compositions reflect a sense of quiet that allows the viewer to observe the harmony of various marks, color, and composition. I thought it was like a really nice like sentence that encompasses your work.
Thank you.
Because it also it makes it make sense for just like the way your choices. I guess the leading with sentence, I was wondering why the name Homework. And how early did that come around?
Homework kind of came around a little bit later, and it was sort of so in contrast to the last show, I didn't actually go away with Kaylin this year. She started a new job, so we didn't go on holiday. I haven't been on vacation and
where's inspiration going to come from?
Yeah, exactly. So I think with Retreat, it was kind of like this outwardly, looking outwards for inspiration, where new surroundings, new places, and just trying to take that all in and kind of create from having that energy inside you. And with Homework, it was kind of like you don't have that opportunity, so what does it mean to look inward with what you already have and kind of create from there? And I think there's sort of like this playful youth or childhood kind of quality to Homework as well. You're kind of left at a position, whether you're in school or whatever, to kind of you are studious on your own. You're required to do your homework on your own, and it's about kind of your own internal ideas and your own kind of thought processes and creating from that. So Homework is kind of like a metaphor for diving deep into your own studies and kind of trying to find inspiration from within, because I don't live a very exciting life. I go to the studio from home every single day, so it's hard to feel inspired when you're in the same room for 8 hours or however long you spend down there, and then you're taking the same commute to and from home. It's it's routine, so to sum it up, Homework was kind of like this internal reflection of what it means to kind of create. And a lot of the study work I did to inform and color were creating my own color swatches and playing with cut paper and cataloging shapes for later use, or just creating a catalog internally of things I like and creating from that.
I really like how you take your life and put it into art. It seems I love that approach. I find it now a lot more important, because you're bringing specifically your perspective. I think finding ways to be you within your art, which it sounds like don't you always do that, but I think the way you even describe it consciously, it seems like you kind of like what I was saying at the beginning. It's it seems like you've you put your art and created a process of how to approach it, and I really admire that you do find within the chaos of what it is to create the art and all these things, you found ways to ground yourself through these steps. And I think this kind of stuff is so challenging to find, and what you've done is that you're seeing the situation, and you're not going outside of it to here you're you can Google some photos of what it's like to be here. I think what you did, you took your life experience and put it into it. I really like that.
Yeah, because there's it's a lot more I can't help but be honest with those kind of things, because
that's the word. It's honest.
Yeah, it's that's who you are. And I think it takes a certain amount of maturity also to kind of listen to yourself in a way. And I think
it's tough.
There's a lot of distraction and other things that can kind of pull you away from that. But I'm indebted to Kaylin a lot too, because she kind of helps me stay grounded in these situations. whether she's like a sounding board for me when I come home and I'm like all distressed and don't know what I'm doing.
Shout out to Kaylin.
Yeah.
There you go. No, I can relate to it so much. It helps so much to have a, because as artists, like you spin in your mind for so long. It's so nice to have someone to ground you who's not a fine artist. I feel like I have a similar situation where I'm so artsy and like in a kind of almost like in a silly way, like your brain just goes down this path, and like you need someone to just smack you, be like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, totally. And she always tells me like she wants to. She looks at my work as, you know, not only as my partner, but as you know, someone that would potentially consume the work in a way that's either buying it for a home or what have you. It's you know, she'll help me with my artist statement and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny as homework is about self-reflection. I probably did the most like collaboration in the show, like either working with you know, my woodworker building the frames, and working with my good friend Hamish, who helped me photograph everything, or Drew kind of wasting his time documenting my stuff for me. And there's this, or even like I worked with my dad, who works at Hemlock Printers, to like help me with the art catalog. So there was just so much.
You're bringing the family together.
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration too. So
are you learning? I'm learning. Is it just so hard to do everything on your own, especially once you set up these ambitious goals? So it's impossible to do without other people.
Totally.
Okay, is it true? So I scrolled down your the website, the art show website, and I was looking at paintings. And it looks like you like sold out more than half of your work already before the show opened. Is that true, or is it?
There's been the gallery does like a pre-sale, so we got the pre-sale just went live.
4, 5, 6, 7. Damn, yeah. So did you know that, or?
I did, of course. Yeah,
so
I'm aware for sure.
You know your work is being sold out before the show was even opened.
Yeah, it's a problem.
It's a problem. Wow, that's the best kind of problem.
Yeah, it's it's good.
But yeah, congrats. It's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a hard thing to manage in a way, because there's obviously, you know, in the months of like January to March or whatever, there's people asking me, inquiring about paintings, and it's like, it's really hard to be like, no, you all have to wait till
the
May.
Show. Yeah.
You know, I don't want to, you know, miss out on those opportunities. So I had a lot of people just come visit me at my studio and kind of chat with me, and you know, next thing you know, we're selling one before the show, and we're like, okay, well, and then it just kind of blows up from there. And then you do, but it's normal for the gallery to do like a preview, which happens like usually a week before the opening. Mm-hmm. So once that goes out, then it's kind of free game for people to start buying, and then yeah,
that's awesome. That's really good. And then I guess you're making people mad who are expecting to get a piece at the show. By the time they get there, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, it's just it's tough, because I want to please everyone. You know, I want to be I want to be able to everyone to have one. I think the problem is like I'm just one man making all these paintings. Yeah. I need some help. So,
and this is something you brought up when last time was at the studios, that finding an honest way to increase outcome of your work while keeping it true to you.
Yeah, I think let's talk about that for a minute. I think it's interesting, you know, all the controversy about artists creating outside, or like getting like Damien Hirst, for example, like hiring like studio crews to kind of like execute his sort of his artwork. And I think personally, I think that's such an underrated, like, to me that sounds harder. It doesn't sound easier, you know. It doesn't sound easier to like get 10 guys or whoever or however many to make sure your work is being executed honestly, and to what degree. I think that's a totally more, that to me that seems more difficult than just being the only person doing it. I mean, eventually you need to reach a demand of like, you know, these guys have demand for their work, so they need to hit these deadlines and produce enough work.
I think, but it would be harder for you. I think it depends on what you're making, because let's say I'm making a concrete box that's like 3 stories high, it's just a box of concrete and it's 3 stories high and 3 stories wide. There's no, if I did it or if 20 other guys did it, you would never know, because there's no, like in your case, there's brush strokes, there's application that it's only you. Like there's, while if you're making concrete box, I think in that case, it's not harder because the outcome will be quite similar. It's not as personalized. Well, in your case, I can see. So when you say you find it harder, I think it would be harder for you because of what the product is. You know what I mean? Like
that's right.
I can totally, like, it's a lot harder to trust 10 other people to get the brushstroke right, which is so hard because it's a feeling. You know what I mean? Like, try to explain, like, can you paint a Scott Sueme brushstroke? It's like, I don't know. And then to you, it's going to be so hard to to articulate that feeling, because it's so much about feeling.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And I think I think you hit it right there. I think it's challenging for artists to let people into their process because it is so specific. Like I know there's some artists that won't like, so much of their work is the artist's hand. Like you look at Andy Dixon or like David Hockney, who did like all those portraits. Like so much of that is about his hand and his work that you can't you can't get an assistant to do anything other than like help you around the studio and maintenance and stuff like that. But I think I saw an interview with Cause, and he talks a lot about like his paintings are so flat, but they're also like he's become more about the design of his work, and like there's probably a very specific process to how he executes his work, and I think he was explaining that it's a hurdle that you have to overcome to let people into your process. And I think for artists that can be that's like that's your baby, but you're letting other people in and you're accepting that it might be slightly different than you doing it, but at the end of the day it's still like it's very much created within his ethos of his brand and his work, that it doesn't change the value of the work, I don't think.
Totally. And but I think later then it's just figuring out, because I mean you could call it a collaboration, but in your case I imagine you would still want to call it, this is a Scott painting, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
And so there's no, and so that the amount of control you have over it, I mean it's all about calling names and how public would perceive it, you know what I mean?
Right.
But when you say like it's becoming a problem, it's because there's a lot more demand for your work than the amount you can produce, right?
I wouldn't say I'm quite there yet. Like I don't think I don't think it's I think hiring someone to paint my work with me, we'll say, as a starting point, that would be almost the last step. Like I would almost need assistance in the studio for other things,
work and
prep work, because there is a lot of prep that goes into my paintings, whether it's like
you're very meticulous with it.
Like priming or setting up the panels, and then like varnishing frames and all this, all the other stuff. That's the actual painting is it's a small slice of what or can be considered a small slice of what needs to happen before and after.
As far as hours go, how much out of like beginning, you someone made a panel for you from beginning to a piece is varnished and ready to go to the gallery, how much of that time like I know it ranges from a painting to painting, but in comparison to the prep work, what is painting?
I would probably say it's I would consider it maybe 60 or 70%.
Okay, that's still like
it's still a big chunk.
Yeah.
But a lot of that painting is like priming the backs and fronts of my paintings, and to start.
I like how you do that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then and then also like creating an underpainting, which I've been doing recently, which that takes, that's still painting, but it's not the actual like the design or the artwork of it. So it totally ranges.
So you're starting slowly starting your own, not a workshop, you're starting a shop.
Yeah, well, I think I've been thinking about painting as like is almost like a product now, like to a certain degree. Like it's still art to me, but it's like
It is, though. I mean, you can also look at it as a business, and I think a lot of people don't want to look at it that way, but that's kind of the reality. It just is.
It's part of the creation of it, I think, and like I don't think I'm quite there yet in my career where I'm like doing work that's very conceptually heavy or just doing a set amount of paintings for a theme. Like I'm still pretty early in my career in the sense that I'm just trying to produce work and get my stuff out there and get more eyes on it. So when you look at it through that lens, it kind of is a numbers game. It's about how many can you do and all while maintaining that level and integrity in the work. So
totally, I think saying that it's being very honest, realistic, where when people don't want to talk about it, I think it's because it kills the romance of what fine art quotation marks is. It's like there's an idea, like an air that, like, the whole, either whether it's like a starving artist idea or just like a true fine artist, like just makes his paintings in the attic or whatever. It's very unrealistic.
Yeah. And I again, that goes back to kind of what you're trying to get out of art too, right? Like it's fine for those individuals for that outlet to be available to them, where they can just create freely and they don't have to think about money or that kind of thing. It's like I play basketball because it's fun and I don't have any I'm not getting paid to play. So for me it's like I get that enjoyment out of it, and I get a sweat, and then that's kind of it. But with art it's like maybe some people are just looking for that creative outlet and that's all they want, but this is painting is my career now, so it's kind of, there's more things that I have to consider before I just just willy-nilly get loose on a canvas and call it a day, you know. So
I thought it was interesting earlier that you brought up, you said that you said your life is not exciting, that like every day is going to a studio, which is how there's an idea that once you start freelancing or once you start working for yourself, all of a sudden you're just doing whatever the hell you want every day. And because you've been in that lifestyle, right, for quite a long time, you've been creating, like, you've done graphic design work, you've done murals, like you've been solo artist working, I guess you could say, for hire, creating paintings. Why is that? I think you should maybe talk a bit about that, because do you think, why is it so? Because people think, once you start working for yourself, you can just get away and do whatever you want. But I guess the reality is there's still that routine that comes with it.
The routine is important. I mean, I think the routine is what keeps you grounded, and I think it's different. Like you don't clock out ever. When you're freelancing, you don't. You're thinking about this stuff like 24/7, but there's definitely moments within that are relaxing, like being able to determine your own schedule, those sort of things, taking little breaks along the way, and it's just a different structure, I think. So
but you still get structure to be successful, it seems like.
For me, yes. I think I like having that sort of that routine. It helps me just work on stay focused and get in when you need to and do the work, so.
And it just feels like for consistency, I mean, even getting better, that seems to be the way to go. And actually, so as you're speaking earlier, that now painting is that's your career, that's your choice. Do you want to, like, what would you say your ideal lifestyle would be then? Because I think they'll probably give an explanation on like the working artist path that you're taking, right?
I think I'm working towards just being a studio artist, like being someone that gets to explore and in a general sense, I think it's just about simplifying my life. Like I think earlier on, from doing graphic design to murals to commercial painting to doing my own, trying to find time to do my own artwork, like I wanted all those things to happen for me at that moment. And I think when you're younger, you kind of want, you're still figuring stuff out and figuring out what you want to do. And there was a time where I wanted to be a spray paint wholesaler. There was time where I wanted to be like a mural artist. There was times where I wanted to be a commercial painter, and times where I wanted to be a studio artist, and like all these things I feel like are leading me in a direction where I want to eventually just do one of those things and do one of those things very well. And I think that's, for me, it's like painting.
Do you think you'll be happy only doing one of those?
I think so, yeah. I think that's not to say I won't like like do the occasional mural or outdoor project or do like a site specific project. Like I think I will still do that. I just I really enjoy the simplicity of just being a studio, like it's just more clear. It's like a clearer vision of how you want your work to look, and just doing that, whether earlier on it was about doing high visibility projects or like building a business, where now I want that to be just a little bit simpler for me,
Simplifying life is sounds like a good way to go.
Yeah, it's
already
pretty a challenge complex. Too. Yeah. It's not a lot of things need to happen before I am able to just do my paintings. Like I don't think I'm quite there yet, but it's a work in progress. It's a good long-term goal for me to have and keep on the back of my mind. I
like that thought. I think, yeah, but what you said though is that you kind of have to do a bunch of things to then really make the decision to be like, here's one thing I'll pursue, and I'll be true to it.
Sure. Yeah, because I was kind of in that position really earlier on. Like I think me and Colin got that studio in Acme just down the street from here. Like what year would that be? Like 2009. And when we first moved in together, it was like, I remember just like we were playing hacky sack like in an empty room. We're like, oh yeah, there's we have a studio now and we're not painting out of our kitchens anymore, and this is like kind of this great moment where we were just like in an empty room. It was about like 600 square feet or whatever, and it was like me, Colin, and Brent Clowater. We're all sharing this one space. And then I remember really early back then, when we first moved in, we literally just had like one rack of paint. Like it was like miscellaneous house paints and certain things, and then I had like one panel in there. And I think so I think I was and then through evolution, it's like I took on the spray paint business, and I took on doing commercial work and all these other things, and now my our studio looks the way it does, where it's like very busy and dense with a lot of different mediums at play. Like everyone's there's like a woodworking area and all these things, and all those things are kind of related to painting, but now I'm at a position where I long for that original
now you're
studio.
Gonna start throwing things out.
Yeah, where it was like literally there's no computers, there's no anything. You just go into a room and you like create. You just make art from like a blank.
I like that.
Yeah, like with nothing else. And I think that's kind of like, in a roundabout way, how you get to kind of focus your life and simplify things to what you really love to do.
Probably goes in cycles. I'm jealous of those artists. I don't know if you follow, there's some, like I follow on Instagram, and sometimes they would show a shot of their studio, and it would be just like a giant room with white walls and canvases hanging in progress. They just like walk around and paint. It sounds like what you're describing.
Yeah, I saw, I was telling James this the other day, one of our other studio mates, but
James Knight.
Shout out James Knight.
For 100 ml. Find him on Instagram. He's cool.
We were talking about this. I was explaining to him, I saw this picture of Cy Twombly's studio, and it was just like literally, a giant room with paintings along the wall, and then like one crate in the center that, which I imagine the paintings would go in, where they would ship them to the gallery or whatever, but that's literally, and then like two chairs. It's like, that's kind of awesome.
That would be... I hope you do that one day. That'll be like a true retreat where you like rent out a cabin somewhere far away, just an empty house, and
do like a residency or something. That'd be really cool.
It would be just like pure art. Sorry, I just realized one thing I didn't touch on that I want to talk about with the art show is that, so as clearly you're quite successful in or becoming more and more successful within the art world. You're selling a lot more work, and you've been represented by Kimoto Gallery, which I think, I don't know if you want to touch on that very quickly, how that came to be. What I wanted to ask is, how do you address pricing now? Because that's always I think a tough subject for artists to figure out what the artwork should be worth.
Yeah, it is tough. I think it's definitely something that's always a work in progress. Like you always want to kind of look at it and look at the I don't want to say demand for your work, but you look at you consider everything going into it. And I think for me, it's working with Kimoto has been amazing. Like our relationship kind of flourished just out of from like a single email that Kat sent me one day, and to contribute work to their grand opening. I think he's worked in other I think he worked at Ian Tan and other galleries before, so he kind of had some experience. But he's an artist himself. He does paintings, and I think for me at the time, it just felt like he was a real human being. Like a lot of the gallerists that I was dealing with, I just wasn't really seeing eye to eye with. So he's helped me a lot with like figuring out pricing and figuring out what your sweet spot is. And I think it's something that we're always like looking at and trying to figure out exactly. But a lot of it was just you look at the other galleries or the other artists that exhibit at that same gallery and kind of where their pricing is. So I wanted my pricing to fit in context with some of the other artists based on where they're at in their careers and where I'm at. So that kind of influences the cost. And you also want to, for me, accessibility was a big thing initially. It was like making sure that your prices weren't too high too quickly, because it's really hard to go the other way around.
It's like knowing your audience, and then kind of it's almost like gauging it around that as well.
And also like just it's something that we're always working on.
It sounds like so many things to consider. Because in the end it's like it is whatever you say, but not so true, because it is what people are willing to pay for your work, right?
Totally. And then there's times where people don't question the pricing at all, and it's just like it's like when you put a bid in on a art job or something, and you're like you think about the price over and over again, and you say to the client and they're like, okay, and you're like,
I should ask for more.
Yeah, exactly. So it's you never really know. You just kind of want to consider as many things as you can going into it, and then
but there's a totally different relationship, like you just mentioned, client work versus pricing your personal work. It's like you can't really use the same numbers almost. It just doesn't translate.
No, it's hard. I mean, with art, it's probably the easiest for me now. Like, I think commercial projects are a lot harder because you have so many variables to consider. Like, accessibility can really change, like accessibility to a wall, right? It's like it's a wall that's this big, and you're like, okay, well, that seems pretty straightforward. And then you're like, oh, and then you realize that you can't actually, there's like bushes in front of it, so you need like a ladder or something like that.
And then
like
the texture sucks.
And then the texture of the wall is annoying, and then there's all these pipes, you know, and all these things, and you're like, oh well, this is actually really difficult.
But I feel like at least with that, there's a criteria. But I guess it's personal. There's a criteria you can kind of consider, like what you just mentioned. But
right.
And then you can kind of look at the design that they want. But when it's your work, it's just it feels like when you're pricing your work, you can only do the math so much, and then you have to go by all the other criteria that kind of abstract, like what is the value of work? Do people like you? Do people know you? Is that a part of it?
Right. Yeah. So I think working with galleries is good because they help you establish a market value for your work. So once your value is established, it's basically it becomes a price per square foot essentially, and then that shouldn't change. Because generally you hope you're painting the same kind of style of work, or there's a formula to which you're creating from, and then once that market value is established, then it's you can adjust it as you move through.
But do you actually look at it as price per square foot when you're pricing your work?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Oh, so you do. There you go.
Yeah.
So there is a math you can do.
There is, but I think what goes into the number is a lot of.
It's just a starting point.
It's just a starting point because, with commissions there's a different price because usually you're dealing a lot more with the client. You have to custom order things, so there's different pricing for commission. So, yeah, it's something that becomes standard, but through a lot of, we'll say, I guess trial and error, coming in.
I'll have to do that for July, so I'll have to figure out. I'll be bugging you a lot at the studio.
Oh man, bug away.
Yeah. How did you come to be so in the studio? I feel like you're the go-to guy for working with new materials. So somehow you just know how to work with a lot of stuff.
I think part of that is just like my obsession with process. You know, like working with spray paint and working with latex a lot, and just figuring things out. And I think a lot of that is just me making dumb mistakes. Like, it's always like the result of me learning something is from something dumb I did.
We're learning on your mistakes is what you're saying.
Yeah, so then
that's nice.
That's why I love sharing that information, because I really don't want someone to have to go through what I did to kind of learn those lessons. And
those are no fun, especially if like a piece gets ruined by something stupid. You did like used a varnish and it's wrong, and
I know, it's like, and I think that goes back to the idea of like jumping in for head first and being a doer. It's like when you do that, you're definitely at the mercy of all these little mistakes that you could make. Like,
but that's just how you end up learning, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. So.
You did some giant projects. What's your most memorable, or one of the most memorable freelance projects you did? Speaking about jumping into big things.
The biggest one was the one I did last year with the Surrey biofuel project. They built a new facility in Surrey that was it's like a closed loop recycling facility where they bring in compost and waste, and then they renew that. They turn it into energy, and then basically all the trucks that collect the stuff and bring it in is all fueled by the same product. So it's a complete closed loop recycling facility. Big building. I put in a bid for it early in the year, and I happened to win, and I think a lot of that is because my pricing was like way too low.
Little did you know.
Little did I know. I was
did you think it was a lot at the time?
I thought it was like, I was kind of
fair.
Yeah, it was fair. It was at a point in time in the year where I wasn't saying no to anything. Like, I was just very willing to work, and so this thing came in, and I looked at the specs and the drawings, and I was like, damn, this looks hard. And I kind of went in my mind through different practices of how we would execute it, and I had to explain some of that in my submission. And I thought it was like a pretty fair price, but I also didn't consider like the commute, like, and the hours were really difficult because I didn't have like first aid certification, so we could only work when there was other people on the site, which, halfway through the job I ended up getting my first aid so we could stay later and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was like super early starts, which is completely not what I'm used to in the sense that I'm usually my commute's very close, and I have the freedom to kind of
control my days.
So that was really tough, like just being on site at 7 a.m. every morning and working on this job.
I remember seeing you those days at the studio. When you come back, you look so drained. And you also tan so much.
Yeah, it was tough, and I learned a lot of like. We had to do these circles. I think there were like 600 circles. They're all three feet in diameter, but they're all alternating between 10 shades of green. Yeah. So each dot had a color code to it, and then they were all placed in sort of like a polka dot pattern. Yeah. So they were all staggered. So we had to measure each dot, and then also the surface was like aluminum siding, or like painted factory finished aluminum siding. So we had to use this like adhesion primer first
to make it stick
to the paint. And I'm like, why? I remember thinking like, why are we even doing this? Like, this is so hard and annoying. And the access was like, lift access. Both walls were awkward. Like, it was just a challenge. And after it was all done, like I think it took about 6 weeks to complete, and then once we were done, I was like, you know what, that actually wasn't that bad. But I definitely
6 weeks is a long time.
I definitely learned a lot of 6 weeks of total painting time. I think it stretched out to, about 3 months because there were rainy days and stuff.
Wow.
But I learned a lot of really, really good lessons, just about primers and different paints and proper way to paint stuff.
Or would you do that again, though?
I would, but I'd probably ask for like 3 times as much money, and then just throw it out there. And if they say yes, then I'll be like, okay, well, here we go. Yeah.
3 months out of your life. But when you look at it that way, it's like, wow, that's actually that's a big chunk.
It was a big chunk, but I think the lessons I got from it were like really, really valuable. And at the end of the day, it's a good piece for my portfolio. It was funny because the guy, it was kind of like a thankless job too, because it was very commercial. So it's like, you oftentimes when I would do murals in my own artistic style or do a mural, even for a brand style, they would be really thankful and that kind of thing. But this project was like through a commercial painting firm who was fulfilling these graphics for an architect in a construction company. So it was just kind of like, oh, you did it, great.
The chain of command. Yeah,
See
good
ya.
job.
Yeah. So it was extremely thankless. And then also we were joking in the studio because the guy had hit me up again to get some basic quoting on this other insane commercial painting project. He's like, oh, I just need a quick quote. Don't look into the numbers pretty seriously. And then I was telling James in the studio, I was like, oh man, I totally thought this guy hated me. And he was like, clearly he still does. And I just started laughing hysterically because it's all these projects are just insane torture.
And that's probably why. But then, think about how many people can even execute that. And it's like, no wonder. I mean, there's probably only so many people who can like take up such a big job and then like still have an artistic, artistic understanding, but also being able to execute a technical job like that.
Yeah.
And then there's you, the only one who can do it. They're gonna keep coming. Do you think you can get to? Do you now get to work on projects that you get to choose? Projects that you like rather than having to like pick projects that are coming? Would you say that change is happening?
I hope it is. I really do, because I think this year is just going to be a good measuring stick in the sense that I definitely set out to create a lot more paintings this year. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how how well they do and how well I work in the studio. But I think last year was pretty insane. Like I did a full basketball court, which
looks sick.
Nice was work. Amazing. I was super happy. That was like one of my favorite projects to work on, but it was also one of the more like physical and laborious. It was funny because I brought Kaylin onto the project because she wasn't working at the time, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be a fun project. The park's like a block away from her house, and we'll just get to like chill and paint the court. And it ended up being like the most heavy lifting, grueling.
Just pushing the paint with those giant
squeegees and like, because all the paint had sand in it, so like these 18-liter drums were like twice as heavy and stuff, and it was just like, it was very physical, and so that was funny, but. Yeah, I think this summer, like I would probably, if I had the choice, I'd probably want to see what it's like to work in the studio all summer and create artwork instead of creating murals, and see how that works out in terms of financially and just filling up my time. And this year will be a good kind of measuring stick for me to figure out how the next year will kind of.
I guess you'll
turn out.
Keep me posted. I get know you're doing better projects is when you're like saying no more than you're saying yes, and you're like, I actually get to be picky, which is good place to be in. Yeah,
I think so. I definitely think I'm getting a lot less inquiries. I think just based on what my portfolio used to look like. Being a graffiti artist and marketing yourself as that, which is something I did for a little while as I was transitioning to fine art. You definitely get a lot more inquiries of like, oh, hey, I have a gymnasium. Like, can you paint a mural in it? We love graffiti. Can you do this? And I definitely don't get those kind of emails anymore. So
Is that good?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's good.
You don't want
I
to do that
think.
kind of stuff.
I mean, sometimes it's like really like for something like film or something where it's like really easy. You get paid super well for the amount of time you put in, and something like graffiti is like a skill that I have in my back pocket. It's like I can bring it out when I need to, but yeah, that's there's no harm in doing that to, you know, fill up a weekend or fill up a single week of work, and
it's worth doing without disrupting yourself too much, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So,
man, we're unfortunately almost out of time, and I actually didn't get into, well, let's see, maybe a third of things I want to get into.
Oh,
I think unfortunately we'll have to skip I want to talk about the monoprints that you did.
Okay, yeah,
for your
sure.
show.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too many things. I gotta ask you. Actually, well, I don't know. Quickly, I don't know if you want to talk about those before you throw a couple of questions at you.
Totally.
Wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah, I can get into it really quick.
Do an outline.
Yeah. So the monoprints. It's a series I did of screen printed series of different shapes on archival paper, and basically it was I've always thought about doing this idea of like studies to kind of complement my paintings, and the monoprint idea just came about because it was a way for me to make a one of one, like, unique set of prints. So each piece is unlike another, but yeah, they sort of have the same kind of feeling, or they are encapsulated in a series, like a print series. So what I did is, well, like we were talking earlier, I worked a lot with cut paper in the series. So I would scan in like some of my favorite shapes that I created from paper, and then from there we burn those shapes into screens, and then my screen printer Ben Knight and I would go into his studio to and basically I would play with placement and color, and he would kind of operate the screen press. So each one we kind of had like this small window in which, you know, there was paint in the screen, and it would eventually dry out, or we'd cycle through certain colors and certain forms. So like be like, place this one here, boom, go on to the next one, place this one, and then okay, now we're switching out the colors. So it was like kind of a neat way to kind of work with the idea of just making do with something, and not really you know, sometimes I with paintings I have the freedom to work and rework things, whereas working with paper there's a certain airy quality to it, so you don't want to, you don't have that option to like rework things. So
and then you put those lines on top with a marker after, and that's like nothing you can do after that.
So like some I would draw on after, or some I would draw before and then do the screen print. So it just kind of like gave me a nice set of rules that I could kind of like create like a series of studies, basically. I
thought it was a really good solution too to what you were talking about, finding ways to, you know, try to produce more work while keeping, once again, true to yourself. And that, you know, that I don't know, that must have sped up the process, because once you've had those shapes figured out for the language you want to pursue, right? So it was just kind of about, I mean, you could do as many, it was just like a way to highlight the idea of like, you know, even if you're limited to you know, say 13 shapes, which is what we used, and introducing the amount of you know, 13 shapes, 15 colors, there's a perpetual, like, endless amount of results that you can get from that. So very awesome. And the texture of the paper, it just looks beautiful. So I think that was like a pretty nice marriage of the shapes and that texture is kind of what you're talking about. All right, what's your let's do this pretty quickly. What was your biggest failure?
Biggest failure?
Big questions.
Gee, I don't know if I have one standout failure, but I think I've had lots of little failures along the way. And I'm someone that very much likes the idea of failure, in the sense that it's, you know, either way, if you fail or if you win, you still learn something. And I think failure is important to, like we were talking about, like all the times where I picked the wrong medium, or all the times where I, like, you know, was trying to rush through something to get it done. There's lots of little moments. I don't know if I can go into too much detail.
You're too positive for an artist.
Yeah. Well, I just might bore you with all these little nuances.
Nobody understands the difference between matte paint and
yeah. So
picked up too glossy of a paint and didn't work out on the wall.
Totally, yeah. So there's like a million and one of those along the way, but I think failure is important to learning for sure.
Yeah. What's the last piece of art that you've purchased?
That I've purchased. I bought a screen print from the Jaunt. It's like a company that does artist residency and screen prints. It was actually I don't think it's not a monoprint, but it is a series of prints from this guy Alex Brewer, and he is he's kind of up there for me in terms of artists that I look up to. He's someone that started in Atlanta in the graffiti scene and kind of was doing abstract works pretty earlier on, like kind of before I started. So he sort of like is a trailblazer in that regard of creating abstracts from like a background in graffiti.
Cool.
His work is very bright and colorful. He does a lot of murals and large scale projects as well, and large scale paintings. Awesome. They're beautiful, and my friend Billy put me onto this that he was doing like a residency in Ireland. Oh wow. And so the idea was that he would go through this company, the Jaunt, and go and create a screen print on location, and then they would release it online, and we were lucky enough to both get one of those. So
that's sweet. Yeah, especially those limited editions are kind of hard to get.
Totally.
I've been tracking some artists, I just miss it always. Okay, man, last one. It's too bad I got so many questions, but we'll have to wrap up. I think I'll just have to get you back when you're working on the next body of work too.
Okay,
last question. What advice would you give your younger self after you finish post-secondary?
Ooh, let's see. I'd probably tell myself to like stay in school.
Actually,
even though I probably wouldn't listen to myself. But I think what I ended up doing is like I went to Emily Carr and I left 2 years in to kind of pursue freelance work. I was like really into graffiti at the time, and I was really into like the idea of working in the field, and I didn't really feel like school was really it was just kind of like wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. Like I think I look back now and the opportunity that I was given that earlier on, I think I would have really now I would really soak that information in, because I studied under a lot of abstract abstract painters at Emily Carr. So it's
never too late.
Yeah, I could always go back
if you really want. But things are going really well, so I guess you don't really need to.
Yeah, but it's interesting how like you need to like remove yourself from that to kind of see the value in it. And I think it wasn't until I left art school and was in the field for like working for 2 years, making very little money, scraping by, and then just like realizing the opportunity that I had, and then just kind of wishing that a lot of those lessons kind of flooded back to me and would reoccur in my head, and I would be like, oh yeah, this is why.
But it sounds like you maintain the studies and force yourself to study anyway. So yeah. I think you're good. You're good in your own hands.
I probably would have told myself to buy a house too.
Oh, there you go. That's right. If you're aware of Vancouver scene, that should have done. Yeah. No, Scott, thank you so much, man. Sorry, the time is running out. I think let's just. I hope the show goes great, and we'll just get you back when you're starting a new body of work.
Awesome, man. Thank you. I'd love to.
And then, so where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram at Scott Sueme and at the Kimoto Gallery. Come to my show.
Sweet, that's right. So May 11th, Kimoto Gallery. Be there because it's going to be amazing.
I'm also doing an artist talk on May 26th, I think. So between 1 and 2. So all that information's on the gallery website. So if you want to hear me talk again,
because you know you do, it's going to be incredible. He's not done. He's just full of amazing information. So be there. I'll be there. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Whew, man, that was so good. And I think the time went by way too fast. I guess next time we'll just get into more stuff. If you want to learn more about Creative Theory Podcast, we're Instagram, Facebook, and all that. That's how you find more info. Next week, Snackcast. Don't miss out. Same time, 2 to 4 p.m. Otherwise, thanks for listening. I appreciate you all. Hopefully you learned something. I definitely did. And Goodbye.
Goodbye.